Hi, I'm Caroline Whitley. I'm one of the 4 paper conservators at ICS. Paper can take many forms and can come from a variety of sources. It was discovered by the Chinese about 2,000 years ago, and there's both a Western and an Eastern tradition of paper making. Basically, paper can be made out of any material with a cellulose base. So it can be sourced from trees, from bamboo, from flowers, anything basically that is an organic growing material. It also can be sourced from things like cotton rags or from linen old sails from tall ships back in the day, in the early 14th, 15th century. They used to use the ripped and torn sails to make into pulp, and then they would make that into what we call now cotton rag paper. Today I'd like to talk about some of the most common forms of damage to paper and how those forms are able to be identified. Looking at the bigger environment in which a piece of paper or a mounted work on paper in a frame is displayed, the bigger environment in which it sits is the all-important factor, and that should be as stable as possible in terms of temperature and humidity with the least amount of fluctuations. The other, probably second most important thing is the way paper is handled. And handling can take many forms. Usually people just think paper is very robust, but there's a level of fragility from very, very fine and fragile to quite robust cardboard-like papers. And so now I would like to show you some examples of different forms of bad handling and the effects that has on paper. This lovely document, a certificate of title, is actually made from parchment, which is an animal skin-based material for writing on, and it predated paper, but we still, here in the paper lab, have to deal with parchments quite often. And as with paper, this is a great example of showing poor handling over time. So as an official document, up here in the corner, which is quite difficult to see, there are lots of pinholes and creasing, and that would have had some other papers attached to it, but that's left permanent damage there. The document also, you can see, is very stained and discoloured, and that's typical of greasy fingers that become darker. The grease marks from oils in the skin become darker over time, whether it's paper or parchment. Also, because this document had to be stored away, it's been folded into several pieces, and wherever those fold lines are, the paper fibres, or here the parchment fibres, basically become very much more fragile and broken and embrittled over time. So our job here would be to try and remediate any of that damage by surface cleaning and humidifying and flattening the work. Poor handling of paper can also include the way that it's attached to a mount or a frame, or if it's a document, how different types of pins and clips can cause damage to the work. So here we have metal staples, metal paper clips. They not only can damage the paper, but they can rust the paper over time if it's in a humid environment. Straight pins, they're all examples of the metals. Here we have different types of masking tapes, packaging tape, a marking tape, and these here are different types of sellotapes. Over time, all of these will degrade and discolour and affect the paper to which they're attached. Also, blue tack is used a lot by people sticking onto the back of works and directly onto a wall, and that has a lot of oils in it and will, in fact, make the paper, most paper types, a bit translucent and transparent over time, and very difficult to remediate that. In this example on the easel here, we have a lovely 19th century watercolour painting that's been completely adhered down to a poor quality cardboard backing support. It would have once had a window mat around the border of it, and what you can see here is the effects of animal glue as it discolours over time. If I take it off the board and turn around, you can see the effects again of the poor quality materials, and this would have once had a timber backing, and that's the effect of the timber. These are the effects of build-up of mould, and this is the effect of tapes here. On the front again of the work, there's a small line surrounding it, and that is also from pollutants coming out of the poor quality mounting materials and actually making the artwork suffer. This little watercolour has a window mat around it and is another example of poor quality mounting and framing. It's got a very nice little decorative line around it which looks pretty, but because it was framed and mounted using wood pulp based cardboard, the boards over time, this would have started out as white or cream, and over the 100 or so years it's been sitting within a frame. This is yellowed, and it would have had, if I can turn it around here, the actual little artwork has been taped onto the window mat, and it would have had a backing board on, and the effect of that being sandwiched all together has actually discoloured and made much more yellow the image. These two engravings on paper are both examples showing the effects of humidity and water damage, tears and mould and foxing on paper that can happen and develop over time. The mould seeps into the paper fibre itself and causes various coloured spottings, which then turns the paper very pulpy. And here the edges, you can see, have become very soft and powdery. This example also shows water damage and tide lining, staining that's come into the paper from that water, and it's also caused the paper to tear because it's become very fragile and powdery, especially around the edges. This old example of newspaper shows the effects of light on a poor quality paper. You can see there's a lighter area down here and a more dark area there. Basically, over time, light can either darken papers, or in the form of, say, watercolour paintings, it can actually fade the pigments out. But this is just an example, really, of a poor quality paper and the embrittlement and darkening that happens with the effects of light. Ideal storage conditions for paper is basically keeping it in an environment without temperature and humidity fluctuations, whether it's on walls or stored in drawers. Anything that creates a buffer to the outside world is of benefit to the paper. It's best to keep paper out of direct sunlight and even away from artificial light, so that it's just in general ambient conditions for lighting. If you do have works of art on paper or documents that are affected by any of these forms of damage that I've discussed today, I highly suggest that you take them to a trained paper conservator rather than trying to do any repairs or remediation yourself.